The deductionist.
God, I feel like a crooner with this stuff. Okay. March 2020. Comedy writer by the name of John Finnemore looked at a puzzle that had broken every mind that had tried it for like 86 years and decided, yeah, he could probably do it too. His words, not mine. It was the only way I'd ever have a shot at it was if I were, for some bizarre reason, trapped in my own home for months on end with nowhere to go and no one to see. Unfortunately, the universe heard him. 4 months later, he becomes the fourth person in history to solve this thing. Not the fourth person to try, the fourth person, full stop, out of God knows how many people since 1934. So here's the question I can't stop turning over. What does it take to build a trap that only catches 4 people in 90 years? Before there's a puzzle, there's a man. And the man is the more interesting case file. Edward Powys Mathers, translator of Persian poetry, literary critic, and by day a fairly respectable man of letters. By night, for 13 years, he sets cryptic crosswords for the Observer. And when it comes time to put a name on the puzzle, his own, it's not good enough, he reaches past it for Torquemada. Tomás Torquemada, Grand Inquisitor of Spain. The man whose name is still shorthand for systematic, patient, deeply enthusiastic cruelty 500 years later. That is not a pen name that you pick by accident. That's more of a mission statement. So, a poetry translator decides his crossword alter ego should share a name with a man who tortured people for sport, and somehow that's the bit everyone skips past on the way to the bloody thing itself. I don't skip past it. If you're building something designed to make 100,000 people feel stupid, I want to know what you called yourself while you did it. So hold that. Keep Torquemada in the room. Because the entire thing that follows, every missing page number, every stripped chapter heading, every dead end, you're probably about to watch me walk down. That's not incompetence in the construction. That's just the Inquisitor doing his job. So 1934. The puzzle goes out to the world with a number attached. 25 quid. 25 quid to the first reader who can put the 100 pages back in order and name the 6 murdered and the 6 who killed them. 2 people split it, Sidney Turner and Kennedy, solving it within the year, each walking away with their share. A third person worked it out too, around the same time, and got a personal note of congratulations from Mathers himself instead of a check. Close enough to matter, but not close enough to win. 3 correct solutions ever before this thing goes quiet for the better part of a century. Now, that's not me trying to build suspense for the sake of it. That's the actual scoreboard. This puzzle has a body count of human confidence, and the record is public. Smash cut to 2019. Unbound republishes it. Patrick Wildgust at Shandy Hall tracks down the original solution, so there's something to check answers against, and because nobody can resist a dare, the prize comes back too. £1,000 this time. £1,000 to the first correct solve. 12 people submit answers. 11 are wrong. 1 is not. That's John Finnemore. 86 years after Torquemada built the trap, a crossword setter who writes for the Times under the name Emu becomes the 4th person on record to walk out the other side. 4 in 90 years. So you're about to spend the rest of this episode watching me try to become the fifth on a chapter most people never even consider attempting in public. So that presents options, does it not? John is alive. Has he ever spoken about how he did? If I realize he would very likely not have spoken about what the method is, outside of those lucky enough to buy him a few chappies at the weekend. But can you track down any hints as to how he put it together, right? This is what he actually told people about the climb, in his own words, on his own blog, after the fact. Nearly every sentence in his copy ended up underlined, 4 months of it. He said directly that the puzzle is built to look impenetrable until you hit one specific breakthrough, and that a lot of people take one look, decide it's impossible, and put it back on the shelf. He includes himself in that. So before lockdown forced his hand, he'd already had a copy, already had a look, and already decided it wasn't for him. So the wall isn't a personal failing. The wall is a structural feature. Torquemada built it on purpose, and Finnemore is telling you from the other side of having beaten it, the giving up at the wall is the single most common outcome. I want that on record before chapter 2, because I will very likely to all on my own. But I refuse to pretend that that's a surprise twist. It happens enough in work. He also said something I think matters more than it first sounds like it should. The puzzle is partly internet-proofed by accident. So in 1934, an obscure line of poetry could stop a reader cold for a week. Today, you Google it in 4 seconds. What still resists a search engine is meaning in the abstract, the why behind a reference rather than the fact of it. So if we translate that into plain terms, Google gets you the facts, sure. Doesn't get you the inference. That bit, that's still on me. So one more thing about the man who beat it. He swore an oath to Lawrence Stern, the Lawrence Stern Trust, rather, to keep the solution under wraps. Not a marketing line, an actual commitment. The only way to know the answer to Cain's Jawbone is to do what he did. So here's a man who will talk for hours about the climb, the underlining, the 4 months, the wall, the breakthrough, and will not give you 1 inch of the actual route. He liked the puzzle enough afterward that he built his own. And you gotta respect that. You got to respect that. That's not a guy keeping a secret out of spite. That's a guy who understood exactly what he'd be taking away from you if he handed you the answer. I'm not interested in the answer either. I'd rather fail 1,000,000 times than be given the right one. I'm interested in whether I can do what he did. So 4 people, 90 years. And whether he did or not, but I like to picture John solving it, just covered in Doritos all over his sofa, with nothing but underlining and a search engine that could only get him halfway. All right? I really want to see if we can get us to the 5th. Okay. So, we're down for page 2. Right? And it's the same thing. Same process. We have a standout notion within a standout notion of that same I, but also plunging for the last time. A few remaining figures and letters swam as they came up to me. Figures and letters swam, same tone, took them in. How are you getting your money's worth out of something from there? All this is just talking about the process of it's just as applicable for someone in an investigation, just as applicable for somebody who's learning something from observation, right? What stands out? How are we giving it life? What kind of questions are we asking about it? London is like that, so we're in London now. It accepts the wanderer. The wanderer is in relation, warm in indifference, warm in something nomadic, traveler. Who's the woman? The woman. It's not Eileen or Irene. No. There's a creamy dress. Vivid coloring. White against the gay brick sepulchre than snow against roses. Dreadful beauty as far as I could see. And I recalled the stark phrases. I'm aware that this is mostly going to make no sense to you guys at the minute, unless you're following along. But this is the same process of, again, okay, so you want to look and understand something about somebody's gait analysis from how they're walking. A simple way, you can complicate it all the live long day, but let me check this on. A simple way of doing this, of what stands out about the way that they're walking. Okay, cool. Let's actually get that out of our heads and into the reality where we can mess around and play with it and highlight it and scribble it out and argue with it, and then ask questions about the process to see what changes, see what survives. Which swept an 100 souls away. An 100 souls isn't grammatically correct. Yet I alive, but being swept connects the boats again. The writer had strangely died today. Of our first name. Who is Henry? Is he Hoover? He was standing by her. Is her the woman? They also call ships she's as well. Pillared neck. What he appreciates. Wow. I may as well have just colored in the entire thing, hadn't I? Right? Okay. So let's make our notes for the board. It occurs to me that as you watch this is just me mumbling and solving and thinking and working on the puzzle, so it's not really going to be that entertaining. So you get me for a few seconds just to briefly explain what you're seeing, and now we'll get back to it. You'll just have to put up with the dip bars that are in the way. So one of the things that I thought could help would be to kind of know my enemy as much as one can know the enemy of a puzzle, right? And I make no secret of the fact that I love puzzles. I love them. Doesn't mean I'm any good. Doesn't mean that there is a regular degree of transferable skill between either of them. It just means that I enjoy trying to do them. That's it, right? Long before locked rooms and poison in the whiskey, the puzzle was the entertainment. Ancient Mesopotamian tablets from about 1200 BC contain what scholars now recognize as the first written riddles, not children's diversions, but intellectual tests, traded between courts and scribes. There was the Sphinx's riddle in Greek mythology. It's not simply a story device. It codifies something that the culture genuinely believed. That the ability to answer, answer well, really, was the mark of a mind worth keeping alive. What those early riddles share with Cain's Jawbone is a structural hostility. They're not games designed to be beaten. They are traps designed to look like games. The Sphinx doesn't ask a question because she wants a conversation. She asks because most people get it wrong. And getting it wrong has consequences. We've all seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail, right? Torquemada. I can't stop saying it like that way either, to be honest. Sorry. Because it feels weird to go Torquemada. Doesn't really work. Torquemada read that tradition and challenge recognized a kindred spirit. You know, the puzzle miscellany as a format goes back similarly far, as in the mixed up element. You know, arranging pictures to form a story. It's a common part of most neurological testing. Arranging words to create a story, that kind of thing. Academic research published in the journal Enthymema traced the narrative riddle contest. It's collections of intellectual games that are presented in story form. It was traced back independently to ancient Greece and West Asia. Both cultures arriving at the same structure from different directions, one from the symposium's drinking games, the other from courts of scribes testing each other's learning. The common root is competition. You know, the pleasure of watching someone try and fail, and the pleasure of succeeding where others haven't. There is a Victorian accelerant with that. You know, puzzle culture exploded in that time for admittedly a mundane reason, but it exploded all the same. Cheap print. Once you can mass produce a newspaper, you can mass produce a problem for readers to solve, and someone will always solve it faster than you expect, and someone will always write a furious letter about how they nearly got there and should be considered all the same. The cryptic crossword emerges from this ecosystem in the 1920s. But it does have older cousins. Acrostics. I love playing with acrostics. It formed a vital part in our immersive coaching game called Internum, where people were sent out puzzles, and it was kind of like a Zoom-based, live, non-violent version of the Michael Douglas film The Game. But if you don't know, acrostics are where the first letters of lines or spell a hidden word or a phrase. They appear in poetry at least as early as the Psalms. At least there's word squares, grids, and the like, where words read identically across and down. You know, they appear in Pompeii, you know, carved into stone walls and the like. The Victorians took these existing forms and then just industrialized them into weekly entertainment. Poe. And I flipping love a Poe story. Poe, who understood puzzlecraft better than most, maybe I'm biased, with the gold bug in 1843. It was an extended demonstration of cryptographic decoding, a piece of fiction whose plot is largely an instruction manual for cracking a substitution cipher. He also wrote directly about puzzle solving as a genre in The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which is not primarily a murder mystery, but an extended argument that a certain kind of mind, analytical, patient, willing to, eliminate the impossible, will reach conclusions that others can't. Si Auguste Dupin is not a detective. He's more of a methodology and a fancy hat. And then we've got disrupted sequence as a literary device. Got a long avant-garde pedigree. Almost none of it was designed as a puzzle to be solved, though. Just understanding the distinction matters because Cain's Jawbone is genuinely unusual in what it asks. The cut-up technique, I think it was from William Burroughs, Brian Gysin, in the late 50s. It involves physically cutting a printed page into sections and then reassembling them at random. The result's not supposed to have a correct reading. That's kind of the point. Burroughs believed linear narrative was a control mechanism and cutting it up was a liberation. He and Gysin argued that random juxtaposition revealed subconscious connections that conventional grammar suppresses. David Bowie, the Stardust Man himself, he used cut-ups extensively in his songwriting, treating the randomized output as an ignition system for imagery he would not have found by sitting down and thinking deliberately. Has anyone seen Luther? The detective show with Idris Elba? He makes use of the David Bowie cut-up plot. You seen a Quentin Tarantino film? Kurt Cobain used it similarly. The technique spread from beat literature into music, into film, to visual art, all the way through the second half of the 20th century. Now, none of this is what Torquemada did. The cut-up tradition just treats scrambled text as the destination. Cain's Jawbone treats it as the obstacle. One is surrealism and the other is sadism. They look similar on the shelf, but they're structurally opposite in intent. 1960, Raymond Queneau and François Le Léonet founded Oulipo, Oulipo. It was the Ouvroir de littérature potentielle, the workshop of potential literature. It was in Paris. Writers, mathematicians, and the like, they were all there to explore what constrained writing could produce. Their famous self-description was rats who construct the labyrinth from which they plan to escape. So Oulipo, produced works like Queneau's 100 milliards de poèmes. Forgive my butchered French pronunciation as well. I'm more concerned with actually speaking than sounding like a French person. It was a book of 10 sonnets on cards where any line from any sonnet could be combined with any line from any other, producing theoretically 100 trillion unique poems. Georges Perec wrote La disparition, a void, essentially, entirely without the letter E. It's amazing. Italo Calvino wrote If on a Winter's Night a Traveller, a novel that structurally implicates the reader in its own fragmentation. The Oulipo sensibility, rather, is adjacent to Cain's Jawbone, but not equivalent. Oulipo imposes a kind of constraint on the writer. Cain's Jawbone imposes a constraint on the reader. The maze is still a maze, but where Oulipo rats build their own and escape it, the reader of Cain's Jawbone is dropped into someone else's and then not given a map. Right? So the one clear literary ancestor of Cain's Jawbone's structural trick is Lawrence Stern's Tristram Shandy. 9 volumes published between 1759 and 1767. Stern includes blank pages, marbled pages, chapters placed in the wrong order intentionally, and a narrative that never reaches the point it keeps promising to reach. He's not scrambling the text as a kind of a puzzle. He's scrambling it more as a joke, a joke about the nature of narrative, but the precedent of a book where page order is not a given, where the reader cannot assume forward progress, means anything is Stern's. No, it's not a coincidence that the Lawrence Stern Trust at Shandy Hall became the keeper of Cain's Jawbone solution. The lineage is direct and clear. Torquemada read the tradition, identified its most structurally subversive example, and then weaponized it. The golden age of detective fiction, roughly 1920 to kind of 1939. It was the operation on a kind of implicit agreement between author and reader. The reader could solve it. All the necessary information would be present in the text, right? No revelation in the final chapter could rely on evidence that the reader had not been given. Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, John Dixon Carr, and whoever else their contemporaries were, they all took this seriously enough that the Detection Club, founded in 1930, required members to swear an oath. I think it was over a skull. I might be misremembering that, but it was an oath to play fair with their readers. Cain's Jawbone, published in 1934, right slap bang in the middle of this period, by a man who spent his professional life setting puzzles for newspaper readers. And it violates the fair play contract almost completely. The pages are not in order. The 6 murders are not clearly delineated. The 6 murderers are not flagged. The reader can't even establish which pages are consecutive, let alone who killed who. Who killed whom? Who? I've heard it both ways. Torquemada is not writing a detective novel. He's writing a detector test. It really defines what kind of solving's required. If you go to a Christie novel, it rewards careful reading and logical deduction. Cain's Jawbone rewards something more like archaeological reconstruction, just assembling fragments into a kind of coherent whole when you're not certain which fragments belong to which layer. The murder mystery is a kind of participatory game rather than a text to be read. It has a parallel history as well. Cluedo, or Clue, if you're from across the pond, designed by Anthony Pratt, first sold to Waddingtons in 1943, with commercial release in 1949. Pratt developed it during wartime blackouts as a parlor game that would occupy the time that people had to spend sheltering. The genius of Cluedo is its information structure. Each player holds partial knowledge. The solution exists in a sealed envelope, and elimination is the primary tool. You do not deduce, you exclude. And then Cluedo spawns a bloody genre. Pun accidental. So by the 1980s, murder mystery dinner party kits were commercially available, assigning guests character roles and feeding information in rounds across a meal. The format explicitly asks participants to do what a detective does: gather testimony, spot inconsistency, form a hypothesis, test it. It then expanded into escape rooms, immersive theater, live-action puzzle events, digital mystery games like the ones that I built. What all of these share, and what distinguishes them from Cain's Jawbone, is a structured information delivery system. The dinner party kit tells you what you need to know and when. Cain's Jawbone gives you everything, everywhere, all at once, and in no order, with no guidance on what matters. The participatory murder mystery genre is a training ground. Cain's Jawbone is the final exam set by someone who has specifically designed it to fail you. Sadistic bastards, the lot of them. The closest direct cousin to Cain's Jawbone in terms of public cultural impact is the armchair treasure. Oh, wow, I always struggle with this. The armchair treasure hunt. I mean, it barely existed before like 79 and then exploded because of a single book, Masquerade. Kit Williams is a painter, craftsman, zero publishing background to speak of, challenged by Tom Mashler at Jonathan Cape to do something no picture book had ever done before. Williams' answer was to spend 2 years painting 15 elaborately detailed illustrations that encoded in layered visual and verbal clues the precise location of a jeweled golden hair he'd crafted himself and buried somewhere in Britain. He published the book, buried the hair, and then waited. Masquerade sold out its entire first print run almost immediately. It became the best-selling book that year. Sorry about that. Phone call. When was that? Best-selling book. Yeah, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. For nearly 3 years, hundreds of thousands of people dug up public parks, sent letters to Williams, formed theories, compared notes in newspapers, and failed specifically and completely. The hair sat in Ampthill Park in Bedfordshire, buried under a specific point indicated by the shadow, Catherine of Aragon's cross at the equinox. The solution really required drawing lines from the eyes of characters in illustrations through their longest digits to pinpoint the letters in the page borders, then forming and solving a riddle from those letters. It was described as solvable by a bright child of 10, while being beyond the grasp of millions of adults for 3 years. The winner, Ken Thomas, turned out to not really have solved it properly. He obtained insider knowledge through a connection to Williams's former girlfriend, and the two people who actually cracked the puzzle correctly was physics teacher Mike Barker and John Rousseau. They missed the burial site by inches when they dug. Scandal, near miss, institutional failure. Masquerade ended almost as badly as it began brilliantly. Its legacy is the armchair treasure hunt as a genre, and it directly spawned The Secret, The Golden Key, they're still unsolved for 30 years, French Hunt on the Trail of the Golden Owl, John Finnemore's own The Researcher's First Murder, which is 100 cards, text on one side and pictures on the other, a deliberate echo of both Masquerade and Cain's Jawbone. What Masquerade uncovers, what every hunt since has had to contend with, is that when you give a puzzle to a mass audience with a real prize attached, you immediately encounter the full spectrum of human problem-solving failure methods. Masquerade hunters dug in Harrisfield because the name sounded like it contained hair. Haresfield. You know, they sent Williams letters identifying the precise latitude and longitude of their grandmother's garden. They formed elaborate theories based on the colors in one illustration that bore no relation to the actual mechanism. Williams had to pay for a sign at Haresfield informing visitors that the hair was not there. The cognitive error at the core of most failed Masquerade solutions is pattern recognition without constraint. It's the human brain being extraordinarily good at finding patterns. It's considerably less good at verifying that the pattern it is found is the intended one rather than an artifact of the finder's own mind. Masquerade searchers found dozens of internally consistent solutions that were completely wrong. I mean, this is not stupidity. This is just a feature of how inference works, especially under these shocking conditions. In terms of what's known about solving these, it's where the research gets thin and the methodology gets interesting. There isn't a large body of academic work on how people solve scrambled narrative puzzles specifically. What exists is more of a combination of solver testimony, cognitive science research on related tasks, and the documented approaches of the handful of people who've succeeded. Right? Solving Cain's Jawbone will require, at minimum, 3 distinct cognitive operations running simultaneously. Sequence reconstruction. So it's identifying which pages are adjacent based on a narrative continuity, sentence flow, character consistency. This is fundamentally a pattern matching task just under uncertainty. And then there's reference decoding. So identifying allusions, quotations, puns, spoonerisms, period-specific knowledge that's embedded in the text. That's a recall and lookup. Google can help with facts. Not with the meaning, though. And then it's identity mapping. So we have to determine which characters are which, who's murdered whom, and confirming that the identified solution satisfies all 6 murderer pairs simultaneously. This is the logical constraint satisfaction. These aren't sequential. A breakthrough on sequence reconstruction changes the character roster. A breakthrough on identity mapping constrains which pages can be adjacent. The puzzle has to be solved in multiple dimensions at once, which is why the wall Finnemore described exists. Until you have enough pieces to constrain each other, none of them constrain anything. Finnemore's documented approach, derived from his own blog posts, gives the clearest picture available of what a successful strategy actually looked like. He underlines nearly every sentence for 4 months. He treated the text forensically, not narratively, looking for points of contact between pages rather than reading for story. He used the internet extensively for reference identification, accepting that period knowledge was the thing he couldn't carry in his head, and he didn't need to. Right? Critically, he said that the puzzle is designed to look impenetrable. It ain't. We've got to get past that. We've got to get through it. It comes from accumulating enough confirmed adjacencies that the remaining uncertainty collapses into something navigable. So from the tradition of Masquerade, the best documented successful strategy involves 2 distinct phases. Identify the mechanism, like how the puzzle's structured, what kind of operation does it require, and only then executing the operation. Most failed masquerade hunters jump straight into execution without correctly identifying the mechanism. They found apparent patterns and then just dug. Barker and Rousseau asked the prior question. What would it take for a book to encode a precise location? That question eliminates most of their false starts before they even get a chance to begin. So you apply that to Cain's Jawbone. The analogous prior question isn't which page comes after which, but it's what would a correct sequence satisfy that an incorrect one wouldn't. So you're very likely to come across 2 to 3 pages that work together rather than just one or 2 pages that work together, right? It's going to have a consistent internal logic at every joint. Character states, temporal markers, narrative voice, literary reference fields, physical continuity between sentence endings and beginnings. An incorrect sequence may satisfy 1 or 2 of those things, but a correct one, that will satisfy all of them. Edward de Bono's lateral thinking framework, developed in the 60s or the 70s, It describes failure mode in terms of entry points. Conventional thinkers approach a problem from its most obvious face and then dig deeper in the same direction. Lateral thinkers change the entry point when the current one stops producing results. So we apply this to Cain's jawbone. The wall Finnemore described is often the result of an incorrect entry point, right? Starting with the page that looks most like an opening, or the one whose content seems the most familiar. The evidence from both successful Cain's jawbone solutions and successful masquerade solutions is that the breakthrough tends not to come from the most obvious entry point, but from a more constrained one, a very specific allusion that can be precisely dated, a character name that appears in only 2 or 3 pages, a sentence fragment that can only continue one way, high constraint, low ambiguity, build outward from certainty rather than inward from assumption. Confirmation bias is your main enemy. Once you've committed to a sequence for 2 or 3 pages, they begin to read subsequent pages as consistent with that sequence, even when the fit is imperfect. The imperfect join just gets explained away. The ambiguous reference gets interpreted in the most convenient direction. It's Bayesian updating, treating every new piece of evidence as a test of the current hypothesis rather than a confirmation of it, and then keeping the prior probability of being wrong explicitly in mind. So in practical terms for Cain's jawbone, this means requiring multiple independent confirmation mechanisms at every join, not just narrative, but for character state, for the temporal logic, for reference fields. It's a join that satisfies everything. A join that satisfies one criterion very convincingly can be a trap. So with that in mind, let's do page 2. Okay, so got page 2 done. There is 13 pieces up there and 12 pieces there to think about. There's quite a lot of things to consider, similar number. But again, there's the through line of the I person, narrator, storyteller, could be anything. Plunging enough to be able to do it for the last time. So there's plunging again, there's in the sea elements, water. That led to me being biased in the next line about letters swimming. Because swimming, I obviously wanted to place that immediately in the sea, but I'd forgotten about my Dickens. It's a metaphor of the time for drinking, being drunk, your vision failing. And checking this online against penny dreadfuls, similar things popped up as well. Then there's possible doing something enough that you would get your money's worth again. So that connects to drinking elements as well. So can this person's vision be trusted at this particular time? The narrator's got a sense of coming home. He knows London. He knows it enough to quote it as having a warm indifference, which could be familiarity, could be somebody who's just a little bit more cynical in their description of particular areas. God knows I feel the same about my hometown. Cynical. I'm familiar for sure, but it's much more cynicism. Now, this is interesting. Again, we get a description of a woman. Right, and I'm, in case you think, well, you're not being too detailed. I don't want to accidentally give things away about the puzzle. This has lasted nearly a century, and I don't want to accidentally do it. You might be arrogant to think that I could accidentally do it, but I want to cover my bases all the same. So, there's a description of her beauty, she, her, and the like. Boats are also called she's and hers, so I'm still holding this idea, but loosely, in the face of the fact that somebody's face is described as buoyant, which is much more of a lively mechanism for the metaphor of joy and being aliveness. There's several botanical descriptions for being upright and supported. If you're standing in a coffin, that's a bit more morose at that particular stage. But there's lots of things to work with. The main kind of push here is, where is it? Which swept an 100 souls. Grammatically, it should be 100 souls. 100,000 souls away, yet I live. Now, there's echoes over here in terms of Coleridge, Rime of the Ancient Mariner, or World War I in terms of the survival angle and the feeling around surviving something. But put that to one side in terms of the discovery of Defoe's journal, a journal of the plague of the year. There is almost a word-for-word quote in that. Almost word for word. Apart from one particular line. So, Torquemada, known for, the wordplay and the like, could be telling us about the Great Plague of London in 1665, but with enough of a highlight around this one particular angle that didn't feature in the quote, that it's directed towards a particular person. And of course, the page ends on a question. Every page where the pages won't connect to the next, otherwise it's immediately an easier puzzle to solve. So there's through lines. Who's she? Right? We have a he from the first page and a she from the second. Who is she and who's Henry? Is Henry the he from the first page? Lots of things to think about. This is only page 2 and it's all heating up from here. So make sure you stick around for the ride. Make sure you've subscribed to the podcast because you can follow along. If you've got your own Cain's Jawbone, let's join in. Let's do this together. Let's solve this thing. I don't care about the prize money. You can keep that. I just want to know I can do it. All right. I'll see you next time for another episode.